numerous and rich panel that is here today to talk to you. And let me start with introducing all the panelists that will be here as resource persons, as presenters this afternoon. I have the honor and pleasure to start with my neighbor to the right, State Secretary Hans Bratskar from Norway. He is the Norwegian Vice Minister, and he will do an introduction on the Nansen initiative to start and kick off the debate. We have then a sequence of speakers. I can first introduce somebody who's probably known to you, most of you very well, David Shepard, Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Environment Program, SPRED. Good to have you, David. We then have Andrew T. No, he's not with us yet. He might join us. Sorry about that one. We then have William Calvo, Minister Council of the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations, all the way to the right. Also on the panel is Ms. Julia Edwards, Pacific Conference of Churches. Julia. To Julia's left is Mr. Sune Gunditz, Head of the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Regional Office of the Pacific. To my left is Mrs. Miawa Toki, Secretary General of the Kiribati Red Cross. And finally, not on the panel yet because of seating constraints, it's Professor Walter Kelly. He's the envoy of the chairmanship of the Nansen initiative. Now, before giving the floor to State Secretary Bratskar, just a little bit of an information on the format and the discussions. We will have, after Hans's introduction, the different speakers making brief presentations and being available for short Q&A sessions. We will then go on to an open Q&A question where all of you have the possibility to ask questions, follow up on the statements, and maybe also share with us your experience with regard to the topic covered by the Nansen initiative. And then we should be able to wrap up this side event at about 4:30. I hope that's agreeable to everyone, and I look forward to an active participation and some very instructive and informative presentations by the panelists. With this, I think I pass the floor on to you, Hans, to give your keynote address on the Nansen initiative. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair, and very good to see so many of you here participating in this event on a very important subject. As we know, displacement as a result of natural disaster is nothing new. We always have floods, earthquakes, droughts, and mudslides. But what is new is the frequency and the intensity of such events due to climate change. We do not know exactly how this will affect us in the future, but we expect to see further deterioration of agricultural land and desertification and reduced access to water. Parts of the earth will thus become less habitable. While such slow onset impacts are expected to be the most important driver of human displacement in the long term, more frequent extreme weather events such as hurricanes and floods will cause even greater displacement in the short term. It was against this backdrop that the states parties to the UNFCCC agreed in Cancun in 2010 to take measures to enhance understanding, coordination and cooperation with regard to climate change, induced displacement, migration and planned relocation at the national, regional and international levels. The Nansen Conference on Climate Change and Displacement in the 21st Century was held in Oslo in 2011 to follow up. This conference gave the Nansen initiative its name. And to just say a few words about Fridtjof Nansen, he was a Norwegian citizen, he was a polar explorer, and he was the first High Commissioner for Refugees in the League of Nations. He was also very much a respected scientist and also independent Norway's first ambassador to London. The purpose of the Nansen initiative, which is led by Norway and Switzerland, is to build consensus among states on the current body of knowledge, the main challenges, best practices, and thus find ways forward to meet the protection needs of people displaced across international borders in the context of climate change and natural disasters. We co-chair the steering group, which includes IOM and UNHCR, as well as Australia, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Germany, Kenya, Costa Rica, and Mexico. The envoy of the chairmanship of the Nansen initiative will say more about the methodology and outcome of the initiative so far. I would just like to say now that we are very pleased that the first regional consultation in June 2013 was held in the Pacific, namely on the Cook Island, and hosted by the country's Prime Minister. You'll hear from other speakers about the outcome of these consultations and how people in small island developing states expect to be affected by climate change. The aim of this process is to improve our understanding of the global dynamics behind movements of people in the context of disasters and the impact of climate change. The Nansen Initiative will hold a global intergovernmental consultative meeting in 2015 to present the outcomes of the regional consultations to a wider group of states in order to develop a protection agenda to help those affected. Good preparedness and sound management of human mobility is important already at this stage if we are to successfully adapt to climate change and ensure sustainable development. We know that this will depend on meaningful partnerships and close cooperation among states, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector. Our regional consultations so far clearly point to the importance of partnerships and burden sharing. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussions today. This meeting provides us an important opportunity to learn from small island developing states and their experiences of human mobility in the context of disasters and climate change. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hans. I think a very comprehensive introduction into the Nansen Initiative and the topic under debate today, also in the context of the SIDS conference, of course. And this gives me the opportunity to pass the microphone on to David Shepard. David will talk to us on the topic climate change in the Pacific, overview of impacts and opportunities for adaptation, and I'm sure follow up also a little bit more specific on the consultations that took place last year in the Cook Islands. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Shepard, Director General of SPREP, Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. We've been working in this region for 40 years to help countries of the Pacific region better manage and protect their environment as a key element of sustainable development. We work in 4 areas: climate change, biodiversity and ecosystems, waste management and pollution, and environmental governance. I'd like to particularly recognise and thank the government of Samoa for their generous hosting of SPREP. If you meet any SPREP staff this week, you'll note they're all smiling. That's because we have such a wonderful campus 3 kilometres from here, and to which you're all invited for our many side events of all evenings this week. The context for climate change in this region has already been elaborated, Chair, but I'd highlight for the Pacific region the issue of vulnerability. The Prime Minister mentioned today the vastness of the region. Let's put this in perspective. The Pacific region is 34% of the Earth's surface, size of Russia, size of the land surface of the moon. It's vast, 30,000 islands, all with an incredible level of vulnerability to impacts of a changing climate and also to poor management of the environment itself. Within our region, we contribute 0.05 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, but in fact our countries are at the front line of the impacts of rising sea level and a changing climate. The 3 countries of Kiribati, Tuvalu, Marshall Islands are 3 out of the 5 lowest countries on Earth. If the IPCC worst case scenarios happen, that is up to 90 centimetre rise of sea level, increases up to 4 degrees, increasing intensity of natural disasters. This spells disaster for many of our island countries. For SPREP, we have a program I'd just highlight briefly on climate, focused on adaptation, working with countries like Kiribati to address fundamental issues such as water security, better management of water, water conservation, awareness of water use, linked with policy. We work on projects such as food security, looking at the development of more salt-tolerant species, Solomon Islands on Tom Java, for example, and we work on coastal zone management, looking at coastal infrastructure, policies, looking at the climate proofing of those infrastructure and developments. In particular with SPREP, we emphasise also the importance of natural ecosystems, for example, protection of coastal mangrove forests, as a key frontline response to a changing climate and rising sea levels. Our program also covers mitigation, renewable energy, policy support for countries to the climate negotiation, and also national level policy, and support for science and information, particularly focused through national meteorological services. I could talk at length about that, but I won't share. You'll be glad to hear that. Just to pull out some of the lessons from our work in the region, and SPREP has had a climate change program for 25 years. One is the importance of action at all levels, from the community level, the national level, to the international community. And this region, as we heard this morning, is calling on all countries coming to the Paris UNFCCC COP next year to agree to a legally binding framework with hard targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, the importance of integration. Integration across different sectors, across ecosystems, and we adopt approaches in this region working from what we call the ridge to the reef to look at the management of land, the management of sea in an integrated way. And in this region also there's been major efforts, as we've highlighted in a workshop just immediately before this, to integrate the responses to natural disasters and the responses to climate change. And there's the development of a regional integrated strategy and also what are called JNAPs, Joint National Action Plans, which at a national level integrate the planning for disaster and climate, given the synergies and the utility of working together in a structured way to address these issues. The third point I'd mention is that partnerships are essential. As we've heard, the theme of this conference, sustainable and durable partnerships, particularly important for climate change between the regional agencies such as SPREP, the SPC and other agencies, working particularly with communities. And also it's important, noting this as a SIDS conference, to look at ways in which we can work better across regions. SPREP is delighted and honoured to partner with the 5Cs, the Caribbean Community Climate Change Centre, and also the Indian Ocean Commission, to look at how we can share experience. And we note that the Nansen initiative is also working across regions. It's very important because many things that they're doing in the Caribbean we can learn from, and vice versa, as with the Indian Ocean. So partnerships are essential, as is exchange of information. The fourth lesson is the critical importance of sustainable finance. It must be adequate, it must be sustainable, it must be linked with building capacity of national, community, regional organisations. And fourthly, the importance of information, and information delivered at those that most need it. So at SPREP we've partnered with the World Meteorological Organization on a project working with the National Met Services to deliver climate information to communities in the context of what does the changing climate in the next 6 months, the next 12 months means in terms of what crops you plant and when, what are the implications in terms of future climate predictions. So the importance of information, but tailored to those that need it in the right structure and format. Some opportunities from this region. I think clearly you've heard, you've seen the political will and enthusiasm and active support is an opportunity. Initiatives like the Regional Strategy for Climate and Disaster Risk Reduction are an opportunity. The importance of building on experience. There's considerable experience in this region. I mentioned the PAC project at SPREP. The adaptation to climate change has now been going for approximately 10 years. The opportunity to learn and build on that experience. And we also note globally the development of instruments such as the Green Climate Fund, which provide an opportunity. But the message from this region is that the funding needs to be delivered in an effective way, process needs to be kept to the minimum, and there needs to be sustainability of the finance. In terms of the issue of human mobility, this is, in this region is obviously a very sensitive issue. SPREP works with and supports its 21 Pacific Island countries. Our view that decisions on this issue are absolutely and entirely up to national governments to make their own decisions and approaches. And in this region there are a range of approaches, and I'm sure we'll hear from Kiribati about what is being discussed and proposed, and there's a whole range of approaches in this region. For SPREP, our focus is and always will be on strengthening resilience, particularly through focused adaptation measures and linked with mitigation and other measures. On the issue of human mobility, SPREP is available and will provide information and support to our member countries on this. And we note in closing, Chair, that when we talk about mobility, and this was emphasised within the workshop last year, we're talking about internal as well as potential external movements. So an example after the tsunami in 2009 was the movement from the coast to the higher areas. So the consideration of this topic needs to look at those two areas. And another message that I took, Chair, from last year was on this issue, the critical role of civil society. So I'm delighted we'll be hearing from civil society, and in particular Red Cross and the church groups, because they have a critical and key role to play. SPREP has been very happy to partner with the Nansen initiative. We think it was a very focused, interesting and open discussion we had in the Cook Islands last year, and we look forward to the continuation of this. And as I mentioned before, hearing from and sharing experience with the other regions in which Nansen is working. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David, for this overview of SPREP's activities and the challenges in the region. Just one question. You mentioned the impact, of course, of climate change on the movement of possible movement of people. Could you just maybe elaborate on how human mobility features in the discourse regarding climate change adaptation in the Pacific?
I think within adaptation there's a range of options on the table, and human mobility is one of those options, but as I've mentioned, Chair, that's entirely a matter for national decision and sovereignty. And as we heard at Cook Islands, and I'm sure you're hearing in other regional workshops, this is a very sensitive area that needs to be approached accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You've seen we've had a small temporary change here on the panel. We welcome Andrew Team, Senior Policy Advisor of the Government of Kiribati, to the panel. Happy to have you here, Andrew, and you're right on the spot. You're next in the list of speakers. Your presentation title is, if I understand correctly, Voluntary Migration as an Effective Adaptation Strategy to Climate Change, the Kiribati government's program on migration with dignity. Thank you very much, Andrew, for elaborating on this.
Thank you very much. I think I want to start the discussion on this with the issue that the government of Kiribati is at a stage where it's already accepted the science and is already telling us that we may not be staying in our country forever, and that there will be a time that we need to prepare to make this when this actually happens. So I think what needs to be clear from the start is that any government that fully recognizes that there may be a threat to its population in the future and does nothing, who is not a responsible government at all. So that is the basis of what the government of Kiribati is trying to do at the moment. And as the chair has already mentioned, the migration with dignity policy is one that endorses the idea that migration will always be a choice made by the individual. The role that the government has or recognizes that it needs to be doing is to ensure that those that actually choose to migrate and leave the country are able to contribute to whichever society they may end up with, and that they do not become refugees. The idea of being a refugee is something that is not acceptable in our own tradition and culture. So the main idea with this policy is to have the individuals being able to work and contribute effectively to whichever society that they may end up with. Now the added benefits for that is that for those who may not be willing to move when the decision is being made for them to actually move, they may end up having relatives or family members who have already moved and are able to provide their own income, extra income that they're able to remit back to those who choose to stay. Now, we understand that it's probably a bit too early for that, given that the science is still not clear on the actual timing on when the actual forced relocation will occur. But ensuring that there are established communities wherever they choose to end up with, that provides a solid backup for those who may end up having to relocate because they are not able to stay or actually forced to relocate. Now, having Kiribati culture already in existence and established wherever they may have ended up at this point, when we're actually faced with having to move later on because of sea level rise, the issue that our atoll we may find in the future. So that enables our future communities who are forced to relocate to be able to move in and settle and establish effectively with the assistance of the already established communities wherever they may have ended up. Now, it has not been a very effective policy, and we take this opportunity to thank the government of Australia in having set up a few programs that have assisted some of our people to study in sectors which are quite in, what's the word? The Australian people are already in need at the moment. So the sector that we have worked with recently is in the medical nursing industry. That has not really been as effective as was originally thought, but those are lessons that we have learned and we hope not to repeat in the future. I don't want to take up too much more, but I think that would be the basic outline of the migration with dignity policy that the government of Kiribati has started in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very concrete, specific example. You mentioned the lesson learned with your program on mental health assistance. Would you have other sort of indications of challenges, opportunities, or maybe lessons learned that you can already share with us?
Well, like I mentioned, the original intentions have not been seen as was originally intended. But the challenges that we actually faced when we first started the proposal to the government of Australia was that naturally they were not really acceptable in the beginning. They were quite reluctant in having to provide a program where it enables their own other people to come in and settle and live in their own country, which are not their citizens. So it took quite some, I'm sorry, if I speak English for too long, I tend to run out of English words. Please bear with me. Yeah, so the main challenges that we faced included the Australian government not really willing to take on this program. And it took quite some negotiations and debate with those that were involved in the discussions for this program. And I think this is the main reason why the program did not last as long as it should have. The program has actually stopped now and they've actually changed it. Instead of having our young people going to Australia and study Australian standards, it's changed now to Australia putting in money to build up our own, local capacity, yeah, but not really at university level, but more trade level, yeah. But this is a start, and I mean, the idea is that we would not stop with Australia alone, but we're planning to move to other countries who may be willing to, expand on these programs.
And certainly an example that is of serious relevance in the case of Kiribati and Kiribati, and we'll probably also bridge the debate overall on the Nansen initiative. Maybe we'll move on to another region of the world now. We have, as I mentioned, with us William Calvo, Minister Counselor of the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the UN. William has been following the regional consultations in Central America closely, of course, and I think you will give us a bit of an update on what the outcome was and what the challenges are that were identified and possible solutions in your region's context.
Do you hear me now? Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. Well, from the government, it's an honor to be here. I have a small, very short presentation, and I promise I will go very fast through it. Sorry, can we go through the presentation? Yes, please. As you know, Central America is one of the most vulnerable areas in the world, and just like seas, we share vulnerabilities to natural disasters. Among those disasters that are common to Central America, well, we can name hurricanes, earthquakes, floodings, landslides, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, etc. You name it. That is one of the reasons why Costa Rica is part of was part of the